He had passed 200 women tonight. 200. And not one of them had made him feel a single thing. June stood at the edge of the Langham Hotel's grand ballroom in New York City, champagne untouched in his hand, watching Manhattan's finest perform their rituals of beauty and ambition with the same detached patience a man gives rain on a window. The gala was the city's most anticipated charity event of the season, which meant two things. The flower arrangements cost more than most people's monthly rent, and every woman in the room was performing. Not for the cameras, not for the cause. For him. He knew it. They knew he knew it. And still they circled, gowns catching chandelier light, smiles sharpened to a precision that took years of practice, eyes calculating the exact angle to hold his gaze. Because June Park, 29, sole heir to the Park family real estate empire that stretched from Manhattan's skyline to the Connecticut coastline, stood 6 feet tall in a custom black suit and a silence so complete it registered as its own kind of power. His closest friend, Felix, had been providing commentary for the last 40 minutes. That one. June, that one in the green. She's been looking at you for 6 minutes straight. I'm counting. And June had responded to every suggestion with the same quiet, immovable nothing that made him legendary in boardrooms and impossible at dinner parties. Because he had grown up watching people perform beauty like a negotiation. He had learned early that when you had what everyone wanted, no one ever let you see who they actually were. So he stood there, waiting for the evening to end, already composing his exit in his head. Then the tray hit the floor. The sound cut through the orchestra's careful melody like a blade. Crystal flutes cracking against marble, champagne spreading across the floor in a wide, glittering arc. A ripple moved through the crowd. Heads turned. Someone near the bar laughed softly. A woman in diamonds sighed with visible irritation. June's eyes moved toward the sound without permission. She was a waitress. Standard black and white uniform. Natural hair pinned back neatly. Dark skin warm under the chandelier light. She was already crouched down when he found her, collecting broken glass with steady hands, jaw set, eyes focused, not panicking, not cowering, not throwing apologies at anyone in earshot. Just working. Methodical. Deliberate. Like the floor of a 5-star New York ballroom was simply a problem that needed solving, and she intended to solve it. The floor manager appeared at her side. Said something close to her ear with the kind of tight-lipped urgency designed to make a person feel small in public. She listened, nodded once, stood, smoothed her uniform with one hand, lifted what remained of her tray with the other, and walked back toward the service corridor with her spine straight and her chin level. Like she had already decided something. Like she had already won something that no one in this room had noticed. June's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. His thoughts stopped. Everything stopped, just for a second, while his eyes followed her across the floor without a single instruction from his brain. Because that walk, that posture, that absolute refusal to be made smaller in a room full of people who hadn't even registered she was alive. It was the most honest thing he had seen all night. Maybe all year. June. Felix's voice was careful in a way it never was. Your face is doing something. I'm fine. You've been staring at a door for 30 seconds. June set his champagne glass down on the nearest surface. Quiet. Deliberate. Find out her name. Felix went still. I'm sorry. Her name, June said again. Before the night ends. Felix stared at him. Looked at the closed service corridor door. Looked back. Then, slowly, he pulled out his phone, because he had known June Park for 15 years, and he had never once heard that particular note in his voice. That low, unguarded, slightly unraveled note that had no business being there. The door was already closed. The orchestra had resumed. 200 women were still circling, still glowing, still performing. And June felt none of it. Only that quiet, insistent pull towards something real in a room constructed entirely from illusion. He told himself it was curiosity. He almost believed it. But something had already shifted, quietly, irreversibly, and neither of them knew it yet. If you've ever watched someone walk past everything perfect and stop for something real, stay with me. This story is only getting started. Her name was Amara Cole. She was 25. She lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn with a window that looked out onto a fire escape she used as a garden because she couldn't afford a balcony. She worked 3 jobs, the gala circuit on weekends, a morning shift at a bakery cafe in the West Village, and 2 evenings a week answering phones for a small law office in Midtown while she finished her nutrition degree one class at a time. Felix delivered this information at 11:47 p.m. with a look on his face that suggested he had roughly 40 questions and the discipline to ask none of them. June read the file once, set his phone down, picked it up, read it again. He did not know what he was looking for, only that the name Amara Cole settled somewhere in his chest like something that had always been there and had only just been found, which made no logical sense. He was a practical man. He did not believe in things that made no logical sense. He went home to his penthouse on the Upper West Side, poured himself a drink he didn't finish, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling window watching the city move below him with the faint, unsettling feeling that something had changed in the architecture of his life. He couldn't find the exact moment that had done it. He just knew it was done. He didn't sleep well. This was new. Amara, meanwhile, had no idea any of this was happening. She took the subway home at midnight with sore feet and a tip that would cover half her electric bill. She let herself into her apartment, watered the small basil plant she kept on the fire escape. She'd named it Leon because it had survived 2 winters and earned it, and made a cup of tea. She fell asleep on the couch before finishing. She was tired in the way that lived in your bones, the way that didn't leave on weekends. She had grown up in Washington, D.C., the second of 3 daughters, raised by a mother who worked nights and believed fiercely in 2 things: education and never making yourself small for anyone. Amara had carried both into New York at 22 with all her ambition and borrowed confidence, and had spent the last 3 years discovering that the city respected neither without receipts. She wasn't bitter about it. She was just honest. She knew what she was building. She knew it took time, which is why, 3 days later, when a man in a dark coat walked into the West Village Cafe at 7:15 in the morning and sat down at the corner table closest to the counter, she looked at him once, processed him as a customer, and went back to steaming milk. She did not recognize him. She had not been looking at faces at the gala. She had been looking at trays. "What can I get you?" she asked when she came to take his order. Her voice was professional, clear, and gave away nothing. "Americano," he said. "Black." She wrote it down. "Name?" "June," he said. She wrote it. Made the coffee. Called his name without looking up. He came to collect it. And when he said thank you, quiet, direct, the way a person says it when they specifically mean it, she glanced up for just a second. Something small and unnamed moved through her chest. She didn't examine it. She was too busy to examine things that small. He sat at the corner table for 40 minutes. No laptop, no phone calls, no performance of productivity. Just quiet, like a man with nowhere better to be. When she cleared his table after he left, there was a tip that made her stop and look at the door. But he was already gone. She told herself it meant nothing. The next morning, he was back. Same table, same order, same quiet thank you that landed specifically. She made the coffee before he finished telling her what he wanted. She didn't tell herself anything about this. She just did it. By the 4th morning, Felix was watching June get dressed for what was technically a $6 coffee run with the focused attention of a man going to a meeting that mattered, and decided very wisely to say nothing. Because June Park had walked past 200 women at the most exclusive gala in Manhattan, and he had come back 4 mornings in a row to a small cafe in the West Village for one woman who didn't even know he existed yet. Something was already happening here. Something quiet and stubborn and impossible to stop. And neither of them had said a word about it yet. But that was about to change. By the 5th morning, Amara knew his order before he gave it. By the 6th, she was making it when she saw him come through the door. She didn't tell herself anything about this. She just did it. The way you do things that feel natural before your brain catches up to tell you to be careful. He always sat at the corner table. Always arrived between 7:10 and 7:20. Always left a tip that was too generous and never called attention to itself. He never tried to extend their conversations. He never pushed. He asked how her morning was the way someone asks who actually wants the answer, which was distinct enough from the way most customers asked that she'd noticed it after the third time. On the seventh morning, without entirely meaning to, she asked him what he did. He looked at her for a moment. That particular pause she was starting to recognize, the one where he was deciding how honest to be. Real estate, he said. Development and investment. Family company. You like it? She asked. Another pause. Honest this time, not evasive. Some of it, he said. The building part. The idea of making something that lasts. Not so much the rest. She nodded, went back to the counter. But she thought about that answer for the rest of her shift, the way you think about things that are more true than they needed to be. On the ninth morning, he was there when she unlocked the door at 6:45. She raised an eyebrow. Early. Couldn't sleep, he said simply. She let him in without a word. Made his coffee. And in the 15 minutes before the morning rush arrived, they talked, really talked, for the first time. About the city. About what it cost to live here versus what it gave back. About the strange loneliness of rooms full of people. He said that last part carefully, like he was testing whether she would understand it or dismiss it. She understood it completely. She said so, and something in his face shifted so quietly she almost missed it. Like a window, opening just slightly. That afternoon, after her shift ended, she was sitting on the front step of her building pulling off her shoes when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered on instinct. Amara. She knew his voice before she processed that she knew it. Calm. Quiet. Careful. How did you get this number? Not angry. Genuinely curious. A pause. I had help, he said. Then, I know that sounds alarming. It sounds, she said, like something a person does when they can't find a normal way to ask for what they want. The pause on his end was longer than she expected. Then, you're right, he said. I should have just asked. Asked what? If I could take you somewhere, June said. Not a date, if that word makes you close the phone. Just somewhere. One afternoon. I want to show you something. She looked out at the street. At the evening light, catching the windows of the building across from hers. She thought about the way he'd said some of it when she'd asked if he liked his work. About the loneliness of rooms full of people. About the tip that never called attention to itself. What is it you want to show me? She asked. A view, he said. Of the city. From somewhere most people never get to see it from. She was quiet for a moment. Just the view. Just the view, he confirmed. And she could hear in his voice that he meant it. She had gotten very good, over 25 years of navigating people, at knowing the difference between someone who meant what they said and someone performing meaning. He meant it. Saturday, she said. I have a shift in the morning. After 2. After 2, he repeated. And the way he said it, quiet, careful, like he was holding something he didn't want to drop, made her press her lips together and feel that small, unnamed thing move through her chest again. This time she let herself notice it. Just for a second. Then she went inside and told herself to be sensible. She was not going to be sensible. She already knew. Saturday was overcast and cool and smelled like rain that hadn't decided to fall yet. Amara wore her best jeans, a cream blouse, and the gold hoop earrings her mother had given her when she graduated high school. The ones she only wore when something felt worth showing up fully for. She told herself this was not significant. June was waiting outside her building at 2:05. Careful enough to not be early, careful enough to not be late. In a dark gray jacket with no visible effort, which meant a great deal of invisible effort, which she filed away and said nothing about. A car waited at the curb. Not flashy. Clean and quiet and expensive in the way that doesn't announce itself. He took her to a rooftop in Midtown that she hadn't known existed. A converted building his company owned, he said without ceremony, with a terrace on the 28th floor that looked out over the entire southern reach of Manhattan. No event. No crowd. Just the city stretched below them in every direction like a held breath. Amara stood at the railing and felt something loosen in her chest. A tightness she'd carried so long she'd stopped noticing it. You were right, she said after a moment. About the view. I told you, he said. Not smugly. just with a quiet satisfaction that was somehow better than smugness. They stood side by side in silence. The city moved below them. A pigeon landed on the railing 3 feet away, evaluated them without interest, and left. Amara laughed, and when she laughed, she felt him turn to look at her. She didn't meet it yet. She wasn't ready yet. They sat on a bench near the terrace edge as the afternoon stretched out. He'd brought coffee in a thermos. She'd brought nothing, which she mentioned, and he said she'd brought better company, and she told him that was a lie, and he said it wasn't, and the quiet argument of it was the most comfortable she'd felt next to another person in longer than she could clearly remember. He told her about growing up between his father's expectations and his own sense of what mattered. About inheriting a company at 24 that he hadn't built and wasn't certain he would have chosen. About the weight of rooms where everyone knew your name, but nobody asked you a real question. She listened without rushing him, didn't look for the gap to insert herself. And when he stopped, she said, quietly, like it was nothing, like it was everything. What would you have built if you'd gotten to choose? He looked at her, like the question had opened a room in him that hadn't seen light in a while, like no one had ever asked it before, which she was beginning to suspect might be true. Something smaller, he said slowly. Something that lasted longer than profit margins. A pause. Something that was mine. She nodded. She understood this the way you understand things that live in your chest, not your head. Then she told him about Washington, D.C., about her mother's hands after a double shift, about arriving in New York at 22 with ideas too big to fit in her luggage, about the nutrition degree she was building one class at a time, and what she intended to do with it, community health, the gap between what people needed to eat to be well and what they could actually afford, the neighborhoods nobody designed programs for. He listened the way she had listened to him, all the way through, without performing attention. When she finished, he said, simply, without architecture, "That's extraordinary." She looked at him sideways. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Say it like it costs you nothing." He was quiet for a moment. "It doesn't cost me anything," he said. "That's not the same as not meaning it." She held his gaze a second longer than she'd intended. The unnamed thing in her chest was getting harder to file away. She looked back at the city. "I should go," she said eventually, though she didn't move. "I know," he said. He didn't move either. They stayed another 20 minutes. The city did the work for them. When she finally stood, and he walked her to the car, and the door closed between them, Amara sat back and felt the exact shape of how much she hadn't wanted to leave. She stared out the window, told herself to be sensible, but the earrings were still in her ears. And somewhere in that building behind her, she was almost certain she'd left something she couldn't name, something she was going to need back. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of morning coffees and quiet conversations, and one more afternoon. This one walking the length of the high line in the pale October light, talking about everything except what was building between them, which was its own kind of honesty. 3 weeks of her noticing that he never performed with her. No charm that wanted something in return. No version of himself calibrated to impress. Just June, slightly unguarded, slightly careful, watching her like she was something worth paying full attention to. She had stopped pretending she didn't feel it. She just hadn't said anything yet, because saying something made it real, and real things could be taken away. She knew this about herself. She was working on it. Then came the benefit dinner in Connecticut, a charity event at a historic estate in New Haven that June's company had helped fund. He asked her, carefully, no pressure in his voice. She could absolutely say no, if she'd come with him. Not as a date, he said, and then paused, like he was reconsidering the word. She pretended not to notice the pause. She went. She wore the only formal dress she owned, a deep burgundy she'd bought for a cousin's wedding 3 years ago, and it still fit perfectly. He met her at the door and looked at her in a way that made her stand straighter and feel, briefly, exactly like enough. The evening was beautiful. He stayed close to her side without making a production of it. When she laughed, he stored it. When she spoke, he listened the way she'd come to expect, fully, like what she said mattered more than what came next. But then a woman approached them. Elegant. Connecticut old money composed, the kind that takes generations. She looked at June with a warmth that was clearly familiar. Then her eyes moved to Amara. Her expression didn't change exactly. It was too practiced for that, but it adjusted. Slightly. The way a room adjusts when it's different from what was expected. June, she said warmly. I wasn't sure you'd come this year. He said her name. She glanced at Amara. Waiting. This is Amara, June said. Not a title. Not a qualifier. Just her name, said like it was its own complete sentence. The woman smiled. Said something pleasant. Moved on. And it was nothing. It was absolutely nothing. But Amara had spent her whole life in rooms that measured you before you opened your mouth, and she felt the adjustment in that woman's expression the way you feel a temperature change. Not dramatic, just real. And something small and already fragile shifted in her chest. She was quiet on the drive back to New York. He noticed. He always noticed. What are you thinking? He asked. She considered not answering, then decided that was worse than the truth. That I was very aware, she said carefully, of being the person in that room who didn't belong. A silence. You belonged, he said. Firm. No hesitation. You were the most interesting person there. That's not the same as belonging, she said. And her voice stayed level even though the thing in her chest was pressing now, urgent and unwelcome. Because she wasn't upset. She was something more complicated than upset. She was afraid. Afraid of how much she wanted this. Afraid that wanting it meant eventually losing it. Afraid she had already let this go further past her own borders than she knew how to protect herself from. She said goodnight at her building with a smile that was too composed. He held the car door for a moment after she stepped out. I'd like to talk, he said quietly. Not tonight, she said. He looked at her, saw more than she'd offered, the way he always did, and said, whenever you're ready. She nodded, went inside, sat on the floor next to Leon the basil plant, and pressed her palms flat against the hardwood and stayed there, completely still, for a long time. Because the feeling in her chest needed somewhere to go, and she didn't know yet where to put it. Her phone stayed quiet. He didn't push. And somehow that was the most disarming thing he could have done. She didn't sleep. And across the city, in a penthouse overlooking the park, neither did he. But something between them was still open, still waiting. One of them just had to be brave enough to walk through it first. For days. For days of a silence that wasn't quite silence. Because he had texted once, just her name followed by, whenever you're ready, I'm here. And then nothing. No pressure. No pursuit. Just that one line sitting in her phone like a door left open in the dark. She went to her classes, worked her shifts, watered Leon. And on the third night, she called her mother, which she always did when something was sitting too heavy to carry alone. She didn't plan what she was going to say. She just found herself saying, there's someone. Her mother didn't ask what he did or what he had. She asked, how does he make you feel? Amara was quiet for a long moment, then said, like I'm worth slowing down for. Her mother was quiet too. Then she said, then what exactly are you afraid of? And Amara said, being wrong. Building something and having it turn into something else. The distance between what he might want and what I am. And her mother said, the way she always said things that cost nothing to say and everything to hear. Baby, the distance you're afraid of lies entirely in your own head. You didn't come to New York to stay inside your own borders. She said goodnight. And let that sit. On the fifth morning, Amara walked into the West Village Cafe at 6:45 and found June already there. Corner table. Americano in front of him. He looked up when the door opened. He didn't smile yet. He just looked at her the way he always looked at her, like she was the most coherent thing in the room. She walked over, sat down across from him without being asked. He waited, and she said, without rehearsal, without performing a composure she didn't feel, I pulled away because I got scared. Not of you. Of wanting something I didn't know how to hold. He was still, listening all the way through. I've spent 3 years in this city, keeping my expectations close to the ground, she continued. Because that's how you survive here. You don't reach for things that might leave. You just build slow and protect what you already have. She looked at him. And then you walked into my cafe every morning like it was just a coffee. And at some point I realized I was rebuilding the whole perimeter. A breath. That scared me. June was quiet for a long moment. His hands were flat on the table. Steady. Then he said, I walked past 200 women at that gala and felt nothing. Not disinterest. Nothing. Like I had spent so long in rooms where everyone wanted something from me that I had stopped believing anyone could ever just see me. His voice was level, but it cost him something to say it. She could hear the cost. Then you dropped a tray, and you picked up every piece of it like it was only ever a problem to solve. And something in me that I had written off as permanently closed just opened. He stopped. Then, I don't know how to do this perfectly. I'm not going to pretend I do. But I know that the last 4 days without any version of you in them were the longest 4 days I've had in years. And I know that when you talk, I want to keep listening. And I know, he stopped himself, like he'd walked to the edge of something and needed a second to decide whether to step off. She said quietly, say it. He looked at her. I know I'm in love with you, he said. Simply, without armor. I know it's faster than makes sense. But I have been a careful person my entire life. And careful has cost me more rooms than I can count. I'm not being careful about this. I'm not willing to be. The cafe was filling around them. Steam from the espresso machine. Someone's music too loud from their earbuds. The morning light coming through the windows at an angle that made everything look like it was already a memory. All of it existing around them like whether that had nothing to do with this moment. Amara looked at him. At the man who had come back 9 mornings in a row for a $6 coffee, he could have had delivered anywhere in the city. At the man who had given her a view of New York she'd been fighting for 3 years and finally let her feel like it was hers. At the man sitting across from her right now with no walls left, just himself, waiting. I'm in love with you too, she said. I just needed 4 days to stop being afraid of it. He let out a breath, slow, like he'd been holding it since Connecticut. And then he smiled. Slowly, completely, without a single wall behind it. And it was, without question, the most quietly devastating thing she had ever seen in her life. She reached across the table. He turned his palm over and held her hand like she was something he had been looking for without knowing he was looking. Outside, New York moved in its relentless, indifferent way. Horns and pigeons and 10,000 people with 10,000 places to be. But at a corner table in a small West Village cafe, 2 people who had spent years building careful, guarded lives were choosing, finally, to build something together instead. It started with a tray hitting the floor, with a man frozen in the middle of a ballroom surrounded by 200 beautiful, perfectly arranged women, unable to see a single one. It started with one woman who picked up every broken piece with her hands and walked away with her head up. It started with the most honest thing in a room full of beautiful lies. And it became, quietly, stubbornly, completely, everything. If this story broke something open in you, smash that like button and subscribe, because June and Amara are just getting started. And I promise you, what comes next will ruin you in the best possible way. Drop a comment and tell me, which moment destroyed you? The freeze? The rooftop? Or the corner table? You decide what we explore next.